Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bebo. In this video, we're going to take a look at the distributive property, but now with a lot more negative numbers involved. So in this first slide, you can see that it says practice distributing negative numbers. So on the outside of the parentheses, we have a -2, and it's going to change our final answer based on what's going on the inside of those parentheses. And so we're going to just, again, see a lot of examples in this video that involve us having to distribute with those negatives. And really the hardest thing with this is just making sure, again, we're watching our signs, keeping track of those negative signs. And I'm going to show you some tips in this video to hopefully help you to reduce any of those errors that might come your way with, again, forgetting those negative signs. All right, so the first one says -2 and then in parentheses g plus 5. So this one should be pretty straightforward. We're just going to multiply the -2 to the g, and we're going to do -2 times the 5. Showing my steps, -2 times g, bring down my plus sign, we'll have a -2 times 5. So -2 times g is going to be -2g, plus we have -2 times 5, which will be a -10. And then we do just need to clean this up, like we've mentioned in a few videos, right? That we're going to do -2g and then -10. All right, so now it's going to get a little bit trickier, but not too bad. So number 2 says -2, and then in parentheses, we have -g plus 5. So just like always, we're going to start off by doing, okay, -2 times -g, and again, I'll write out my steps here. Bring down my plus sign, we're going to have -2 times 5. -2 times a -g, so -1. So -2 times -1 would be a positive 2g, plus this -2 times 5, which is a -10. Again, we do need to clean that up though and not have plus negative written. So we're going to write this as 2g minus 10. And there's my final answer for number 2. Now 3 and 4 is where it gets a little bit tricky. So my advice for students is when you have a negative on the outside that you have to distribute, if you see you have a subtraction sign on the inside, you should take the time to rewrite that as adding the opposite on the inside. So instead of writing it as g minus 5, we're going to think of this as g plus -5 to hopefully, again, help us with those errors that are commonly made where we forget and we lose track of that negative that's technically on the inside there. So that would be my advice. Do you have to do it? No, but more often than not, when students do this, they don't tend to make that mistake of losing track of what the sign is supposed to actually be. So now that I've rewritten that g minus 5 as g plus -5, we're going to distribute -2 times g. Then I'm going to bring down a plus sign because, again, I rewrote it. And then we have -2 times -5. -2 times a 1g is just going to be -2g. Plus -2 times -5 is a positive 10. And then we are all done. That is my final answer. So we're going to do the same idea on number 4. We have -2 and then in parentheses, this -g minus 5. My advice on this one, that -5, rewrite it as a plus negative on the inside, right? Write that as plus -5 before we distribute that negative factor to everything on the inside. So -2 times -g. Again, I'm going to write out my steps, bring down that plus sign that we have now rewritten because, again, we did keep, change. So -2 times -5 is going to be the last multiplication we have to do for this one. -2 times -1g is going to be a positive 2g, plus we're going to have -2 times -5, which is a positive 10. And that's my final answer for that question. Moving into more examples. These ones, again, we're taking a negative number and we're multiplying to, again, everything inside the parentheses. So we have -5 multiplied by 2x plus 9. This one, because there's no subtraction on the inside, I would just go ahead and multiply. So -5 times 2x, that's going to be a -10x, plus a -5 times 9, which is going to be a -45. And then we just want to clean this up. Instead of writing as plus negative, this will be the same as -10x, and then it'll be minus 45 on the end. And then that's my final answer. For number 6, this is one that I would advise because, again, we have that subtraction on the inside and we're going to be multiplying a -2.5 to everything in the inside of those parentheses. Take the time to rewrite that -2 as plus -2. So now we're going to, again, take whatever's on the outside. So -2.5 times 4k, I like to think of that as just like 25 cents, right? 25 quarters, 4 quarters make $1. But we have to add in 1 decimal place back since it's 2.5. And so this would be 10.0 or just 10. And it's going to be a -10 because again, it was a negative times a positive. Bring down my plus sign, then we're going to do negative 2.5 times a negative 2. And again, 2 quarters, right? You can think of it that way. That's going to be 50 cents, but we have to add that 1 decimal place back in. So that's going to be 5.0 or just 5. And in this case, it's going to be a positive. And then that's it. That's my final answer. So now for number 7, we talked about those unit fractions before. So again, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, right? Basically your numerator is 1. Essentially just means you're going to divide. So when you multiply by a unit fraction, essentially you're just dividing by whatever that denominator is. So we're going to do negative 1/2 times 6t. So 1/2 of 6t is going to be 3t, but it is going to be a negative because again, we did a negative multiplied by a positive, plus a negative 1/2 times 2 would be a negative 1. And then we'll just clean this up like we did back on the first example on the slide and write that as -1 instead of plus -1. Again, rewriting that adding a negative as just subtraction is the best way to go with these. Okay, so now for number 8 here, -10, and then in parentheses, -4 minus 2j. Again, my advice, rewrite that minus 2j as plus a negative 2j. And then we'll distribute. -10 times -4. That's a positive 40. Bring down my plus sign. -10 times a negative 2j is going to be a positive 20j. And then that's it for that question. Again, if we wanted to write this in standard form so that the variable term is first, it would look like the following. Again, they're the same thing. Just again, as you move forward in math, we tend to get a little bit pickier on the order in which your terms are written. So just make sure you're paying attention to your teacher and following what directions they have given you on how to write your final answers. Okay, so number 9, we got -3, and then in parentheses, -p plus 7. So again, multiplying. -3 times -p, again, that's a -1. -3 times -1 is going to be a positive 3. And we have our variable on the end there. Bring down my plus sign. -3 times 7 is going to be a -21. And then just cleaning this up. So 3p plus -21, same thing as 3p minus 21. All right, and then for number 10, it says -2, and then in parentheses, 6d minus 11. So we are going to distribute -2 times 6d, and then kind of skip that step, but I'm going to write that as plus negative, and then we're going to multiply that by a -11. So that way, again, we don't lose track of that negative sign that is technically in front of the 11. So -2 times 6d will be a -12d, plus we have -2 times -11, which is going to be a positive 22. And then that's going to be it for that question. So again, my advice, if you have subtraction going on the inside, to just take the time to rewrite it as adding the opposite, and then distribute the negative number to everything that's on the inside. All right, so taking a look at just a few more examples. The one on the left says -4, and then in parentheses, 5x minus 3 plus 15. So first step, get rid of those parentheses. So to do that, we have to distribute. -4 times the 5x, and then we have a -4 times that 3. But again, it gets kind of tricky when you have that subtraction sign in front. So taking the time to rewrite that as a plus -3 really wouldn't be a bad idea. So now when we distribute this, -4 to everything, we have -4 times 5x, which will be a -20x. I'm going to bring down that plus sign, and then we have -4 times -3, which is a positive 12. The 15 was not inside the parentheses, so nothing got distributed to that, so it's just hanging out on the end here. And now these two together are going to be combined because those are like terms, they're both just constants. So we're going to have -20x, and then this 12 plus 15 is going to make 27. And then there's our final answer. This is as far as we can go with it. Now for this middle one, this is one of my favorite ones to always include in the notes for my students because they always try to go through and do this 10 minus 2 first. Again, order of operations says you need to multiply. Then the other mistake that students make besides doing the wrong operation first is that they just try to distribute this 2. But that is not 2. That is technically a -2. So that subtraction, again, I always try to advise my students to do this. Rewrite that subtraction as adding a -2 because it is a -2 that is being multiplied to everything that's on the inside of those parentheses, right? Rewriting that as plus -2, and then we're going to distribute that again to everything that's on the inside of those parentheses. So the -2 is what's being multiplied by the 4, and it's being multiplied to that 3x. So the 10 is just hanging out front. So we got 10 plus, and then negative 2 times 4, that's a negative 8, plus a negative 2 times that 3x would make negative 6x. And then we just need to go through and combine like terms. So in this one, we have the 10 and the negative 8 that are like terms, because again, they're both constants. The 10 plus negative 8 is going to be positive 2. Plus, we have that negative 6x still that's hanging out. And then I'm just going to rewrite this as negative 6x plus 2. And then there's my final answer. You could also write it as 2 minus 6x. Again, whenever I can, I just try to show us again how to do this in standard form. So again, having the variable term first followed by the constant. All right, now for the last one on this slide, this again is another one of my favorite examples to share with students because they're like, what is going on here with what looks like just subtraction? And then we have this set, right, this expression here inside these parentheses. This, remember, is, again, we can add a 1 in front of here. So technically, if I rewrite this, this is 18x minus, or even, let's go even further, write it as a plus negative 1 that's being multiplied by the negative 3x and the 9 here. So that minus of that expression, essentially, you're going to multiply everything on the inside of those parentheses by a negative 1. And we're going to see this quite a bit in a later video when we do subtracting of linear expressions, because essentially that's the idea, is that you are writing it as its opposite, which essentially is you multiplying something by negative 1. So if you're still kind of like, I'm not so sure on this step, check out the video on subtracting algebraic expressions, or technically subtracting linear expressions in that one, to help clarify that a little bit more. So essentially for right now though, if you see, and if I go back and erase what I had here, what was originally in the problem, we just have a subtraction sign and then this group of parentheses. Just think of it as, again, you're multiplying everything inside the parentheses by a negative 1, because technically that is what is hidden here, is that there's a 1. All right, so now that we have it written separately so we can see a little bit easier, we're going to be doing a negative 1 times a negative 3x and then a negative 1 times 9. So the 18x is still out front. Plus, now we have negative 1 times negative 3x, which will be a positive 3x, plus negative 1 times 9, which is going to be a negative 9. We're going to combine like terms. So our like terms in this case are the 18x and the 3x. So 18x's and 3x's, that's going to make a total of 21x. And then again, instead of writing it as plus negative 9, we just want to write it as subtracting 9. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully that helps clear up some of those distributive property questions when there's a lot of negatives involved. Again, my advice is to rewrite that subtraction as adding the opposite and then go from there with the distributive property. Thanks for watching.